Alright, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to DBO, the show where we build lots of shit really quickly and tell you how to do it. Anyway, so this is part number 2 of our S52 into an E30 how-to. So if you're at this video and you have not seen the first video, make sure you click the link and watch the first one before you watch this one, because there's a lot of stuff in there that you're going to need to know. Anyhow, this video is completely chassis prep and engine installation. So what I'm going to show you is every single thing that you need to do to your E30. I'll try to talk about all the different little options that you've got for parts and how you can get around things. But I'm sure you don't want to just hear me flapping my gums for no reason. So I'm going to jump right into it. So we are doing an S52. This came out of a 1997 M3. I have already prepped everything. It's got the E34 pan on it. It's got the correct mounts on it. It's got the correct hoses on it. This engine's ready to go in. So at this point, we're ready to prep the body. So come over here. The very first thing we're going to do is solve the booster issue. Now, what I mean by that is when you're doing this swap, the intake manifold on the 24 valve motors, meaning the M50, M52, S50, S52, they all come into contact with the booster. Now, there's a few different ways that you can solve this. The cheapest, most budget-friendly, but most labor-intensive option is to move the booster over. That's what I'm going to be doing because I did not want to source another booster, and quite frankly, I have not had tons of great success with using boosters from other cars. There are a few exceptions to that, and I'll get into that, but this is your guy right here. If you're going to be moving your booster over, you're going to want to get one of these. You don't need to, it's not necessary, but it's $5, and it's a 3D printed perfect template that allows you to mark out your car and drill the necessary holes and cut out the necessary metal to move this booster over. It's about a ½ an inch, quarter to a ½ an inch. I'm not sure the exact measurements. I've had to forget them at this point because I have this. But I tell you what, let's measure it so that way if you're not using one of these, you've got the measurements. From center to center here, we are looking at about a ½ an inch. So a ½ an inch is going to be the money mark for moving your booster over. Now take in mind, again, if you don't have this template, you need to hog out a bunch of the metal so that this portion on the booster right here, your clevis rod, or really the rod that goes into the diaphragm on the booster, has room to move. So you can see that I've already removed the booster, obviously, and marked it out with my template here. But this is what you're looking for. You want to make a good little half moon here, you know, a waxing moon or waning moon, whatever it is. I'm not a scientist. Right there on the edge towards the driver's side. Now, if you're doing a right-hand drive swap, I'm sorry, I don't have any information for you. I don't even know if you need to do this. So this is only applicable really to US and right-hand drive cars. Anyway, having said that, the holes also all need to go over a ½ inch and also hogging out that. But before you do that, and before you're able to do that, you're going to have to remove your booster. Now, what that entails doing is removing first and foremost your master cylinder, okay, which is 2 11 millimeters right here on these lines. Now, I've moved these out of the way a little bit since because we're going to be rearranging them anyway. We'll get into that. So you've got your 2 11 millimeters. Take them off of your master cylinder, at which point in time, you got to remove this little guy in order to get the lines completely off. It just makes it a lot easier. So what you're going to do is just grab it from both sides and pull up firmly, and that pops these 2 little tapered nipples out of their respective holes. Once you have that done, there are 2 13 millimeter bolts that you'll need to remove, at which point in time your master cylinder, your brake master cylinder, will pull straight out. Okay, now you're going to have to pull those lines out of the way. Be very gentle because it is easy to kink them, so be careful with those. Don't try to, you know, hook them into a 90-degree angle to get them out of the way. Just kind of gently push them out of the way and get your master cylinder out. When you're done with that, it was easier for me to show you this removed, so that's what I'm doing. Under your dash, you're going to need to remove your lower dash cover. Now, if you've got a late model, that's going to be different than you've got an early model. I don't feel like I need to show you guys how to do that, but if you want to know, please comment below. Once you have your dash cover removed so that you can actually see up under the dash and to the bolts, you're going to follow your brake pedal and clutch pedals, if you have them, down towards the firewall, at which point in time you'll see 4 of these bolts. Okay? You're only going to see the nut side for the most part, but they are 13 millimeters. There are 4 of them. This top left one right here, you're going to have to put the socket and extension. I use the 4-inch extension on a deep socket 13 millimeter, and you have to put it through the brake pedal, believe it or not. There's a large hole at the top of the brake pedal that you can put the socket through, and it lines up perfectly with this bolt. Take the rest of them off, and then the last thing you're going to need to do is unhook your brake pedal return spring from your clevis pin, and I'll show you what that looks like. Stand by. So this is your clevis pin, okay? This is what it looks like. This one's a little crusty, but your brake pedal return spring hooks right there. What you're going to want to do is pull down and then push forward, and that'll unhook it off of this. When you're done with that, you're going to be taking this clip off. So now the way to take this off, so what you need to do is you need to lift this lip up right here, if you can see it. So I'll pull this up and then pull it towards the lip. So you want to pull that lip away from the pin. See how that channel goes out that way? So that's how you remove it. Lip up, pull towards you or away from you. It depends on how it's oriented. A lot of these have been removed before, so anyway, you got it. This little guy right here makes it a lot easier. These are $5 at Harbor Freight. Just go get a set. You'll be able to kind of pry this and start it from the opposite side. So from the driver side towards the passenger side, you'll pry it, it'll kind of pop it out a little bit, and then you can fit it right there and slide this completely out. And what that does is that disconnects your brake pedal from the linkage. So as it's assembled, it's going to look like this. That goes all the way through, and this clip slides on the other side. So you're going to remove the clip, and then you're going to pop it through a little bit, and then slide this completely out. So once you've got that done, this is all the way out, you're ready to rock. There are other options to do this. You do not have to modify the chassis of your car if you don't want to. For starters, there are a few different brake boosters that work for this pretty well. I've used quite a few of them, so I'm going to try to give you advice on what works and what doesn't. First and foremost, you have the ever popular Porsche 944 brake booster. There's a Girling and an ATE version of that. Now I forget which, but one of them has completely the wrong size clevis pin on it. Meaning that the rod coming out of the brake booster is not only the wrong diameter, but it is also too long. I very much discourage you guys from using that. It does not ever end well, honestly. There's not really a good way to turn that rod down. Cutting it to size and retapping it just never really works. So don't use that one. There is another version, and now I apologize, I forget whether it's the ATE or the Girling, but it does have the correct size. You just need to cut it to length and then move your clevis fork over, which is the part that's shaped like a U on the end of your brake booster here. So that's an option. You can also use an E21 brake booster. Again, you're gonna have to modify the clevis rod on it. Not a huge fan of that one either. My favorite two that I've ever used are the 325iX brake booster and the E34 or E32 brake booster. Now, having said that, if you do use the E34/E32 brake booster, I believe it's the E32 brake booster has the brake line fittings are the same size on the master cylinder. So you can use that master cylinder in order to get it attached, and it works. And now it's a double diaphragm as well. So you get technically more boost pressure out of your diaphragm. The only thing that stinks about that is that you have to remote mount your reservoir. So what I did on a couple of the swaps was I mounted it higher, so up off of, let me get the master cylinder here. So let's say this is your E32 master. You're going to be mounting it up like that. And the reason you have to do that is because it interferes with the throttle body when you do the 24 valve swap. But it does work very well. The brake feel is really good. I'm actually a big fan of that one. The 325iX booster is very similar. Since the 325iX has different geometry on the strut towers, they used a completely different booster. It's very similar to the E34. It bolts right up. The clevis is the right size. You don't have to adjust anything. The master cylinder bolts right up. That is also a very low maintenance option. There's also a couple other boosters I've heard of people using. I don't want to advise you on them, but I've heard you can use the Volkswagen Fox. There's a bunch of other ones. Just basically finding one that has the right bolt pattern, the right clevis fork, and the right diameter is the key here. But my advice to you would be either move your existing one over, use an E32 or E34, or use a 325iX. There are very few and far between other options that kind of work but also are not super great. So I hope that thoroughly covers the brake booster side of things. I'm going to go ahead and bust out the drill and the, what the heck is that thing called? Carbide. I'm going to go ahead and remove the rest of this material, make it look nice and pretty, and at which point in time we will reinstall the brake booster, and that is really all you need to do above and beyond the engine prep in terms of getting the chassis ready. So I'm going to go ahead and get to it right now, and we'll get you back here in a second. Okay, and we're back. As you can tell, I finished hogging out all the material for the booster. Fits like a charm. First try. As Aaron Lounsbury would say, first try Friday. Anyway, so the last part of our booster debacle here, and I'm going to go ahead and let you guys get in nice and close here, is this is the clevis fork, right? And so what we're going to do, you'll notice that I've marked this line right here. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to cut this right here, and then I'm going to move it over to the other side, space it off. So I'm going to cut out a piece of metal that is the exact same width as this, weld it right here, and then I'm going to weld this piece that I cut off right here. So basically what we're doing is making so where this is sitting, like, or when this is on the brake booster, your second part of the clevis is now offset. There's two different ways to do this. First, you can do this if you don't have another one of these. The easier way is if you have two of these off of any donor car at the junkyard, whatever, it doesn't really matter. They're all pretty much the same. BMWs, that is. What you can do is just take a second one of these and chop it to where you just cut one of these ends off, and then you just stack it on the other side, so then it looks like a trident, and that offsets it the perfect amount. But the idea is just to get it to where this still bolts up and it doesn't make your clevis as it goes. Let's say your brake booster is right here. You don't want your clevis offset, and I know that this is, you know, whatever, pictorial, whatever you want to say. A little bit, fuck, what's the word? What am I looking for? It's raunchy, whatever. Get your minds out of the gutter. Provocative.
Yeah.
The people like it. Anyway, you don't want your clevis to be offset, because when you're pushing it, it's going to start wearing the seals and grinding things. You want your brake booster master cylinder to go in and out perfectly straight. So that's why we're doing this. You can get it to work by forcing it over, but I promise you, you're going to be replacing your brake booster or your master cylinder or both within about a week. So offset it. Make sure you have a welder. If you don't have a welder, make friends with one. Make friends with someone who does have one. So I'm going to get to modifying this. I may go out in the yard and pull another clevis fork off of a junk car, but maybe not. I might be too lazy for that. So anyway, I'm going to start cutting and welding, and we'll bring you guys back in as soon as I'm done. As you can see, I have my offset boy. So here's what I did. I took our little clevis pin, obviously, put it through both sides after I had cut it off, and then I used these washers that I mic'd that are the exact same thickness of what the original spacing used to be. So the pin keeps your holes aligned, and the washers keep it separated. I don't know what size washers these are. I tell you guys, just use a set of calipers and figure it out for yourself. But this is what we're going for. It looks goofy, I know, but this is the exact offset that we need. So I'm gonna go ahead and install this on the car, and then I believe it's time to start putting motors in, if my clutch is here. Okay, so I decided that the OBD1 fuel rail was gonna work better. So we get to show you that. On this particular car, because of the way that the fuel lines are arranged, it is really not going to go as well with an E36 style fuel pressure regulator. So, fuel pressure regulator on this. Now take in mind, when you guys are hooking up your fuel lines, the regulator side is always the return side. So when we put it on, the rear of the engine is going to contain the regulator, so your supply line is going to go in the front. Unfortunately, you can't really get the cover to work, the OBD2 injector cover. mostly because you have to cut these off, but also because the bolt holes don't line up. So that sucks, but you know what? Quite honestly, it's going to be a cleaner swap this way rather than having the fuel pressure regulator dangling beneath the car. There wasn't really a good spot for it. So that's why I decided to opt towards this side of things. So what I've done so far that I'm goofing with right now is I greased these up just a little bit so that the O-rings go in nice and easy. As you can see, greasy. So I'll click this on here real quick and then you guys will be able to see exactly what I was talking about with those brackets. And actually, now that I'm going to fit it, you also have to cut off the inside, this section right here on the inboard side of both of these because they contact right here. So I'm going to do that real quick. Take me 2 seconds and then we will put this on. One S52 ready to go in the car. List of things that I did to prep this to make my life easier. First and foremost, fuel lines. I put the fuel lines on pre-measured. I marked the supply and the return right here. Okay, so when you're doing this, the easiest way to find the supply, find your fuel filter, trace it all the way down. Your fuel filter is always your supply. You would never filter fuel after the engine. So I marked the supply and return on the car side. I marked supply and return on this side. I put the hose clamps on this side. I also put the hose clamps ready to go on the coolant hoses, so that way once it's on, all I have to do is slide them down and tighten them. I also put the vacuum line from the manifold onto the fuel pressure regulator. Also, hot tip, if you guys are doing the OBD1 fuel rail instead of the OBD2, you can actually use the existing vacuum line and just reroute it and just plug it right in. It's already got the correct fitting on it and everything. So, bam. The only thing I need to do that I'm going to skip for right now because it's almost the end of the day and I want to get the hell out of here, no offense guys, is I need to put the injector clips on and I need to make the little support brackets for the fuel rail. So no big deal, we'll conquer that tomorrow. But you know, it's going to be like 3 seconds later for you guys. I tried to get this engine as close to being running as I possibly can before it goes in. The AC compressor is off. You want to make sure that if you left your AC compressor in the car so that you didn't have to discharge the system or recover the refrigerant, you want to make sure that's tucked out of the way. You want to make sure all your wiring is grouped on top of the motor. So, shabam, something like that. You basically want to get all your little ancillaries and everything kind of roughly where they go, but out of the way, if that makes any sense. I've got our vacuum line already on the motor for the brake booster, so that should more or less plug right in. Let's see, I've got the ground ready to bolt right onto the car. Serpentine belt is on. Brand new serpentine belt.
You've got the harness ready to go.
Harness is all ready to go, that's correct. The power steering lines I sorted out before it goes in, and with the OBD2 stuff, your reservoir is bolted to the subframe, so you literally don't have to do anything. I could fill the power steering right now if I wanted to.
This could be its own power steering.
Exactly. It could be powering itself.
Yeah.
Who knows? So anyway, that is about where we're at, and I'm just going to make sure everything is kind of tucked out of the way and it's not going to get pinched as I'm putting it in. But yeah, one thing I did not mention, if you guys are doing OBD2 stuff, is that you're going to have what's called a Cyclone Separator coming off the bottom of the engine. It's basically just a PCV system that has an oil drain. Now that oil drain ideally should be plumbed into the dipstick. So what you would have to do is take your E34 dipstick and make it look like this. This is not an E34 dipstick. This is an E36 dipstick. But you can chop this piece off and weld it onto your E34 dipstick, or you can plumb it into the oil pan in any other fashion. It doesn't really matter. Honestly, you can block it off as well. It's not really highly recommended, but I've done it on my own cars and I've never had oiling issues or PCV issues or any sort of crankcase pressure issues at all. So
maybe if you're just trying to be California compliant.
Yeah. If you guys are doing full emission stuff, make sure you do it because they do check for that. I am going to be making this pretty much emissions compliant and wiring everything up and getting all the cats working and all the charcoal filters and everything all hooked up, so that way it can pass emissions up in Seattle where Brock lives. We will time lapse you and see you in a sec. Okay, well, look at this. We got an engine in a car. That's exciting. First thing in the morning, right off the bat, got to win. So let's see here. List of things to do. We need to wire all the major powers and grounds over here off of the main hot wire coming from the battery. And I'm going to be going into detail on all of this for you guys, but just giving an overall to-do list here. We need to make an adapter to go from the X20, which is this guy, to the C101, which is that guy right there. This is where all of your major signals come through. Your start signal, your fuel pump, tack signal, all of that kind of stuff is all going through the C101. Let's see, what else do we need to do? We need to get the trans brace on. We need to get the fuel hooked up, the radiator hooked up, the heater core hooked up. Anyway, we've got a big work list ahead of us. You're going to see me do it anyway, so I don't need to just start listing things here. I'm going to try to get the AC compressor hooked up. It looks like it's actually going to fit, so that's cool. That's pretty exciting. I did have to take off the M42 AC compressor. We had a guy come over and drain it before I did so. Don't worry, I'm not about killing the environment. But the engine does not fit with the AC compressor in. It doesn't have enough room to droop out of the way. Maybe if you got really aggressive with the lines and you could get it onto the other side of the frame rail, you could, but quite frankly, I needed to use the other AC compressor anyway, and rather than swap all the clutches and everything over to get the pulley, I just went ahead and swapped them out. So I'm going to hook the AC up as well with any luck, but that's not what you guys care about. Let's get to fuel, wiring, heater core, and all the fun stuff. Okay, cool. So I guess right off the bat, we're going to go ahead and start with hooking up all the water. You want to do this before you start really running wires and stuff, so that way you know what you need to kind of run around. But luckily, since I pre-staged everything, this should be more or less a plug-and-play affair, and it looks like it's going to be. So I am going to get these lines hooked up. I pre-staged them, so the clamps are already on the hoses. I just need to slip the hoses on and then tighten them. And let's see if that other hose actually fits. Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. That hose is perfect. It literally matches up like the perfect angle. Okay, so that part number I gave you guys is awesome, and they carry it at, should be every AutoZone, I guess. So if you need the swap hose for the heater core line that comes off the back of the head on the 24 valve swap, that part number I gave you is money. It lines right up. So that's exciting. I'm going to get these on real quick, and then we can work on getting some water in it, and then we'll work on wiring it, and I'll put the throttle body back on it. And hopefully with any luck, we should have a running motor here in a couple hours. So cool, let's do it. Okay, so fuel lines going on, but actually before I talk about that, I should probably show you how the heater core lines turned out. So let's talk about cooling systems.
Also, world's fastest dropping lift.
Yep, observe power of the speed lift.
The golden 80s or 70s or whenever this lift was.
I don't know, this is an old one.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see that the it's a little bit more pinched than I'd like, but it's still got plenty of flow. So when it's pressurized, it ought to be completely fine. The top hose has a little bit of a clearance issue with this, but you can always bend the heater core line down if you want to. On this particular car, it's not going to impede flow quite as much. The orientation of these lines is not so much important as to what provides the best amount of flow for the heater core. So I found that in this particular swap, now have in mind that all of these chassis are going to be slightly different, whether you have an early 325E, whether you've got a late 325, a 318, an early 318, an M3, whatever. Every single time I do one of these swaps, it kind of fits a little bit differently, even though I've used the exact same parts on everything. So there will be a certain level of improvisation to your swaps here. But as long as you have a thorough understanding of what needs to connect to what, you should be able to figure it out. Having said that, we have our heater core hooked up and all the hoses tight, and I think we're going to encounter no issues there. I test fit the M3 radiator. It did not fit worth a damn in this car, and I have used that radiator many times. But in this particular car, it did not like to fit. So I'm going to be using the original 318 radiator to this car. It actually fits beautifully. Our overflow line right here, all I'm going to have to do is cut it right here, and then our overflow will be hooked up perfectly. It maintains our bleed valve, which is awesome. And then I just need to get one hose with a 90-degree that hooks from there to there, and I can use the original hose from the M3 on the bottom. So that pretty much sorts our cooling system. The only thing that I'm gonna need to figure out is fans, and it looks like we've got plenty of room for a nice big electric fan there. So that's probably the route I'm gonna go. I will get into that later. I like to save the radiator for the very last thing, because you can get it running, you can sort a bunch of problems, you can do everything you need to do before you finally put the radiator in and put water in it. So that's usually the last thing I do. So we'll save that for last. But we know now that the 318 radiator is gonna be the appropriate one for this car. Things that you ought to be looking for in terms of what radiator is obviously clearance from the radiator to the engine, and whether or not you're going to be able to use the overflow. Again, every car is going to be slightly different here. I have put the E36 M3 overflow on that side before. I've been able to put it in its original spot before. I've used the late model style on the driver's side for the overflow. I've used the peanut style on the passenger side for the overflow before. But the bottom line is, as long as you get an overflow reservoir hooked onto this line somehow, it doesn't really matter where it is. Take in mind that your overflow reservoir should be the highest point of your cooling system, okay? And the reason for that is so that air bubbles can escape. You want that pressure to be, or you want the bubbles to be able to escape to the highest point of the water. If you're not able to mount it at a higher point than everything else on your engine, or at least equivalent with the highest point in your engine, a good trick is to go up to AutoZone or wherever and snag you one of these bad boys. It comes with all the little adapters that you can hook into your overflow to give you extra water and extra pressure, so that way it helps push the bubbles out while the car's running. But we'll get into that. So now that we've got all the radiator figured out, I'm gonna start hooking up the fuel. If you guys remember from before, I had already hooked up the fuel lines to the fuel rail and kind of run them where they need to go. That's gonna save you a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to fight around the chassis to get these fuel lines hooked up. I also marked them. That's gonna help you a lot as well. And I also marked the lines on the car side. So all I have to do is hook up the 2 S's and the 2 R's, supply and return. Fuel systems here. The stock 318i pump will absolutely keep up with an NA S52.
M60 as well.
M60 as well, he's right. We know that from experience. It keeps up just fine. The only circumstance where you're gonna have to worry about putting a bigger pump in is either if your pump is tired, or if you are intending on boosting it or adding any sort of a power adder of any sort, nitrous, turbo, supercharger, etc. But overall, even the 318 fuel pumps will keep up, so no big deal. And as I've stated before, find your fuel filter, trace your line. So we're going over here, and then it crosses over, goes over here. See, and so I wrote an S on the chassis. I trimmed this, so you're not gonna see the S I wrote on that, but then your return line just goes right here. And if you're wondering what this third line is, this is for your charcoal canister. So there's going to be a solenoid that goes from your S52 or M50 or M52 to your charcoal canister, and then from your charcoal canister back to the tank. So that's pretty easy to sort. I'm going to go ahead and continue hooking these lines up, and then once we get the fuel system sorted, we'll move on to the next. So see you in a sec. Okay guys, now is the ever daunting wiring. This is what keeps most people from finishing this swap, and that should not be the case, because I'm going to tell you it is not freaking hard. And I'm going to show you step by step, every single wire, exactly what you got to do here, okay? It is no big deal. Don't be intimidated by it. Don't waste your money on one of those swap harnesses. Go buy a C101 chopped off of something, or go cut one out of a junkyard, get a chassis side X20, and you'll be ready to rock. That's literally all you need. Other than soldering iron and heat shrink, literally,
for this car,
for this particular swap. Now the wiring that I'm about to show you applies to every 24 valve swap. There may be some very slight differences, but this is going to be all you need to know, okay? So we're gonna start on this side, we're gonna work our way that way. And I'm gonna show you every single wire, and then I'm gonna show you how to make the harness. So we're just gonna go ahead and dive in here. First, this guy right here. This originally supplies the power to the E36 fuse box. You do not need this. This wire is already fed 12 volts. You do not need to feed it 12 volts. So what you can do is cut the end off of it and insulate it really well, because you don't want it touching the chassis. This is going to be a hot 12 volt point. You can use this to supply power for your electric fan if you want. There's a lot of different things that you can do with this, but you do not need to feed this 12 volts. Ignore this. Chop it off, cover it up, make sure it's safe, don't let it touch the chassis, okay? All right, now moving on. We're gonna dive into it, but this right here is your X20. Don't worry about these two, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get a chassis side E36 or any other car that has an X20 style plug, does not matter. We're going to get the chassis side, we're going to cut it off the car, okay? And then what we're gonna do is we are going to get an engine side C101, which is this plug right here. If you're doing an early model, this is called a C104, okay? And the wiring is actually even a lot easier for that. It's like legitimately 6 wires. It's very, very, very easy. But we're gonna be focusing on the C101, which goes from 1986 all the way through the production years of the E30s. Reviewing here, chassis side X20, you're gonna need to cut one of those off of a car in the junkyard. Engine side C101, cut one of those off. Set those aside, we're gonna dive into that here in a sec. Moving over to here. This looks like a big jumble of crap and it looks intimidating. Oh no, what do I do with all these wires? Okay, well I'm gonna show you. Very easy. So if you're using an automatic transmission, you're gonna need this. If you're not, completely ignore it. You can cut this out of the harness if you choose to do so. I have already deleted everything and swapped to a manual ECU, so we're not gonna have any issues with that. This is not something you need to do. Let me be very clear about this. You do not need a manual ECU. You can run your car on an EWS deleted automatic ECU, so don't worry about that. This was for when it was in the E36. I did a manual to automatic conversion, and via Texas laws you can't have any lights on, so we had to get rid of them. Anyway, moving on. So what we're gonna do with this is we're gonna take the connector off, shove it through there. If you have a late model, your connector will fit through, okay? So let me take this off for you. So the way to take this off and put it on, hook it in like that, push it down, clamp it down like that. I didn't get it all the way on here. There you go, that's what it should look like. Undo it like that, boom, done. Okay, so we're gonna shove this through there. I'm not gonna do it yet because it's gonna get a little bit in the way of what I'm about to show you guys. But that's your ECU, okay? So we're gonna leave that. Matter of fact, I'm gonna hook it back up because I don't wanna get it confused with the automatic one. Okay, so we've covered those two plugs. This guy right here, if you are running a secondary air pump, this is what this connector is for, okay? Now, I believe on this car, I'm going to give Brock the option of running it. I don't know whether Seattle has emissions or not, but I'm going to go ahead and just make this car emissions compliant with CAT's secondary air pump and charcoal canister, just for legality reasons. Now, in the E36, this mounts over here. You can actually make this work over here just fine. If you really want to make it clean, you can take the old bracketry and you can weld it in, and this will sit really nicely. Now, you will have to extend this hose to get it to go all the way over to the exhaust manifold. But, you know, you guys can figure that out. I'll show you as I go along. But this is not necessary if you're in a non-emission state or if you're registering it as a race car or whatever the heck you want to do. This is not really necessary. You can ignore it. Brown wires always on these harnesses are grounds, okay? Reds are hots. Red and yellow, always hot, okay? Now moving on. Also, just so you guys know, if you are in doubt of what a wire is, an easy way to tell, like this, you're like, oh man, what the heck is this? I don't know. Okay, well, you can strip the insulation off and see what color the wire is underneath. That's an easy way to tell whether it's a hot or a ground. This one I happen to know is a ground. The ground's at the same point as this on the E36, right about there. And luckily, these cars actually have a bolt for it. Boom, right there. And always use a star washer. The star washers help cut into the wires and into the chassis and give you a better ground. So, hot tip. Okay, so we got that covered. All right, now this guy right here, this is a hot as well, and this is a hot. So, these two guys need to go onto your main hot block coming from the E30, okay? This supplies all of the power for all of the relays. It supplies the power for the starter. It supplies the power for everything that the engine needs. So these two are very important. Relay, not necessary. All right, and then moving on. And our last hot is right here. And I believe this one supplies the main power for the secondary air pump right here. But all three of these wires, as you can tell, red connectors, or red heat shrink rather, on the wire. If these are discolored or you're unsure, like I said, go ahead and strip it back and you'll be able to see the wire color. Red is always going to be hot in BMWs, always, okay? So there's our three hots. Okay, oh, here's the secondary air pump bracket. So you can use this, and if you want, you can bolt it right into your car and then that way you'll get a nice clean secondary air pump mounting point. So we'll see if we can do that. This plug right here is also for this, or I'm sorry, this is your coil harness. So when you have this mounted, what you're going to do, and I don't even know why I unplugged this when I was pulling the motor, but this connects right here, and this supplies power and signals for all of your coils. Okay, so if this isn't connected, your car is not going to run. So if you're like, what the heck, you know, you've got everything connected, you've checked all your powers and grounds and everything, and you're not getting spark, well, make sure this is connected, guys. So that's one thing that I need to double check before I try to start this car. Okay, lastly, right here, this guy. You're like, what the heck is that? Ignore it. You don't need it at all. This is the 20-pin diagnostic plug that BMW used to use back in the 90s. If you do not want to run an OBD2 wire for a traditional OBD2 plug, you can use this. They sell adapters that go literally from this 20-pin BMW dealio to a traditional OBD2 cable, and you can read all your check engine codes and whatever. So it saves you work. I don't like running the OBD2 wire. I don't like cutting up the inside of the chassis. You can use this just fine, and the adapter cable is, I think, like 12 bucks on eBay. So you might as well just do that. And that's literally it, guys. So at this point, you guys know what all of these hots and grounds are. I'm going to hook these up, maybe off camera, maybe on camera, I don't know. But from here, let's make the wiring adapter. That's the next big step. This is the biggest part of this. This is what intimidates people the most. It's very, very, very easy. Don't be intimidated by it, guys. Okay, so I'm going to set up my little table with my chair, my diagram and everything, and then I'm going to show you everything you need to do to make the wiring diagram. So let's do it. Sitting in front of me here, I have all of the prerequisites to make your 24 valve swap run. So going from right to left here, or from where you're looking, left to right. Wire strippers, crimpers. Actually, I don't think we're going to need these, but I brought them anyway. Cutters. Chassis side X20. This particular one's from an E34. Doesn't matter what you get it from. We're going to be testing. The wire colors don't matter. That's what I'm trying to say. We're going to be testing these wires one by one to find the ones that we need. And in order to do that, you're going to need a multimeter. This is going to make your life a lot easier. You can do it without, but I don't recommend it at all. Get one of these. They're like $5 at Harbor Freight. All you need is a continuity feature for this particular exercise. And then finally, soldering iron, shrink wrap. Use this little crack torch for melting the shrink wrap. You can also use a heat gun, and solder. Also, for bonus, flux. This is going to make your job go a lot quicker and a lot easier. Also, a lot better solders, quite honestly. Okay, so basically what we're going to do here, and I've got an easy link for you guys to go to. Let me pull it up here. The chart that I always use, just because I've used it a million times, and this is what I went off of when I did my very first E30 swap. I've just been using it ever since because I know it works. Is RM, well, we're going to include it in the description, but it's rmeuropean.com for RockyMountainEuropean.com/BMW-E30. Well, anyway, it'll be in the description. You get the idea. But if you scroll down, you're going to see a chart, and it's got all of the wire numbers for 91318IS, and then all of them for the E36 connector. Now, if you use an E34 connector, don't worry, it's going to be the same. Just use the E36 pinout. Don't worry about using the E34 pinout. Use this chart. The only thing that you need to be wary of is there are some years, I believe it was 1987, where there was a ground in the C101 for the ABS rather than a hot. So make sure you check your ABS pinouts on your chassis side and on your swap side, just to make sure you're not sending a very large unfused hot to ground. You're going to catch your car on fire. So very important. But we're just going to go through one by one, and basically the way that I do this is I pick the pin that I want. So I'll find, let's say we're going to do pin 23. Okay, so we're going to go over here, set up our multimeter on continuity. Now some have the beep feature, some do not. You'll see OL for open lead, and then if you've got one that beeps, it beeps. If not, you'll see here, sorry, I know this noise is really annoying, but you're going to see all zeros or really close to zeros is what you're going to see, and basically that's a measure of resistance. It's going to be showing no resistance, but the way that you find and make sure that you're on the correct wire, let's see, we're going to go, actually, why don't we just do an exercise here. So it says E36 connector, pin 25 is blue, and it's for the alternator, so we're going to go find pin 25 on the X20 side. So, bam, right here. And then we're going to take the other probe and we're going to start going through here until we get a beep. I knew which wire it was. I cheated, but either way, either a beep or a 0, and then that's how you know you're on the correct wire. And then so what I do at that point is I pull that wire out and I strip only that wire. So that way you don't lose track of which one you're on, okay? So now I know that this wire right here is number 25 and it is for the alternator. Now what we're gonna do is do the exact same thing for the E30 side. So the X20, right? This is the X20.
Or C101.
Or sorry, C101, thank you for the correction.
Gotcha.
I've done this a little bit too long. Anyway, I'm gonna go through on this connector and I'm gonna find the exact same thing. And basically we're gonna repeat this process all the way down the list for every single pin that we need. So what I'm doing right now is just removing the sheathing. And guys, if you're doing the swap and you're taking the time to make your own connector, don't use butt connectors. Just don't do it, seriously. It's cheap enough to get the correct equipment to solder with, and it's easy enough to do. And if you don't know how to do it, it's a good skill to learn, so do it anyway. But we're gonna go through, do the same thing, and on the E30 side, it should be the blue wire as well. BMW almost always uses blue for alternator exciter, which is what that is. It basically fields the alternator and allows it to charge. So, let's see, on here, I believe it's pin 1, let's double check. Pin 1, alternator, blue. Okay, so we're gonna go through on the outer ring, look for pin 1. Some old farts like me might need reading glasses because these numbers are really freaking small. Okay, pin 1, it's right there. So let's check continuity. It's either this one or the other blue one. All right, look at that, first try Friday. All right, so strip it. And my preferred method of doing this, well, firstly, let's go ahead and get rid of this. Before you solder it together, it's worth noting that the shorter you make this, actually, okay, so the longer you make it, the easier it's gonna be to solder, but the shorter you make it, the cleaner your swap's gonna look, because it's literally just gonna be boop, boop, and then you can just connect car side, engine side, bam, bam, done. I like to give it about 6 inches, so I probably am gonna trim this down quite a bit to where we're gonna be looking at something right about like that. That's about the right size right there. So I'm gonna trim that down, but before I do that, and before I really start rolling through these, I'm gonna show you my preferred way of soldering. And you know what, we'll just go ahead and do it because I gotta cut these anyway. So, if you bought flux, first thing you're gonna wanna do is dip at least one end into the flux. So what I like to do is I'll get the flux up to the tip, and then I'll just kinda dip the wire in it. All flux really is acid. It just makes the solder flow easier and gives it a place to go. So one wire is really all you need to do. You can do both for good measure if you want. Just kind of, again, makes it easier and quicker. So we're gonna go ahead and lube these up. But then what I like to do is I'll try to eyeball and split the wire 50-50 on both sides. So kind of about like that. And then, oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Before you do anything, don't forget to put your heat shrink on the wire. So, because otherwise you're gonna have to cut the wire in half and do it again. You'd be surprised at how easy it is to forget that when you do this 20 times.
So easy.
It's very easy to forget. Okay, so now that we've got these well separated, what I do is I interlock them and I spin them like that. So then you get a nice, tight, straight connection that you don't have to fold. Heat up your soldering iron. So I'll get a little solder on your tip here. Touch it to it. Soak it up. Bam. Then you can kind of heat it to flow it. That's as easy as it is. And when you have flux, that's how quick it is. And then when you're done with that, let it cool down just a little bit. I kind of touch it with my fingers, not the smartest, but it works quick. Slide your heat shrink over. Get your heat source. Shrink her up. It's kind of windy. Bam. there you go. There's a really solid connection that you hopefully will never ever have to troubleshoot. I'm gonna have to do that again because I don't want a 2-foot connector. So anyway, I'm gonna start going through it. I'm gonna provide the wiring diagrams, and all you need to do is exactly the process that I just did. Go through that list, find pin 1 for alternator, find the pin, touch one side of your probe to it, get it to beep, make sure it's that wire, strip it, do them all one at a time. Once you get all of them done, you can cut away the wires that you no longer need. But before you do that, I would recommend test firing your car, okay? So do the wiring after you've got the fuel hooked up and you can actually run it. Don't run it for long when you don't have a cooling system, but you will be able to run it. So test fire your car. Once you know your car runs, then you can cut away all the extra wires when you know your connector is working entirely properly. Then what I like to do is get some of this fabric tape made for wiring. You can get it at angryAss.com if you would like. They are good friends of ours, so help support them if you choose to do so. It's great stuff, and it makes your stuff look professional. So anyway, I'm gonna keep going. I don't think you guys want to see me go through this wire by wire, but that's exactly what I'm gonna do, and then we'll jump back in as soon as I'm done. Cool, see you in a sec. I'm hoping you enjoyed the time lapse of my hard labor. And now that we've got this done, I've also done a little bit of work off camera, but I'll go over that stuff with you guys. So we're gonna go over a pre-start checklist. This should be done anytime you're doing any engine swap or any engine install or removal. So first and foremost, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna double check the pin out on this. We're just gonna go through with continuity again. And we're gonna go, you know, pin to pin, just making sure that I connected all these wires properly, so that way we don't have any weird electrical problems at all. So let's do that. The other things that we're gonna do, obviously you wanna make sure that your engine has oil in it, your engine has a filter in it, that there's no hot electrical points touching anything. So if you guys remember the fuse box location from the E36, I went ahead and before we do a test start, I taped it all up. We can fine tune that a little later. Oh, and now that I'm seeing it, I need to plug up that brake booster line. No big deal. We're just gonna be doing a test start and to verify that the fuel pump is turning on, the engine has spark, everything runs, and basically the wiring adapter is good and chassis side, everything's happy. Obviously you don't wanna run it for too long with no water in it, but it's okay to test run it for 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds, no big deal. So yeah, let's go check the wiring and then we'll go back through and do a little pre-flight check here, and with any luck we ought to hear this drag and roar. Let's do it. Okay, so as you saw, we verified the wiring, everything checks out on continuity, so we've got all the pins connected correctly. Let's go ahead and check the oil. Oil is at full. And let's see, battery is unhooked, ground is on. The one thing that I did do off camera was connect all the wires that I was showing you guys. Now this isn't the final iteration of wiring, this is just for the test start here, but you can see, oh actually I need to tighten that now that I'm looking at it. You can see we've got the 3 main hots that I showed you guys connected, we've got the 2 from the fuse box connected, and then we have the 2 grounds connected. That is literally all you need to do above and beyond that adapter, as long as you've got your engine ground connected, obviously. So I'm going to tighten this one little ground and then let's crank this. So this is going to be the unadulterated first start. If you guys don't hear this line in the video, you won't know it, but that means I fucked up and you don't get to see it.
Yep.
So let's see what happens.
All right. You got no belts. Do you think the battery's good?
No, belt's on. What do you mean?
Oh yeah, totally.
Just
The
AC
outer
belt.
belt.
Yeah, the AC belt's not on.
Yeah, it's opposite on M60s. AC in.
Oh, you know what? I need to check to make sure this thing's in neutral before I go firing it. Okay, I think we're ready to start it. Verified it's in neutral. It's got new MAF. Oh, and I may have to plug my finger over that. Let's
All right, guys. Let's take a bet here, and I'm gonna see if I can get Will into it. Is it gonna start or is it gonna not start? Will, you think it's gonna start?
Of course it's gonna start.
Okay, I think it's not gonna start without something else. So should we bet a shot on this right now?
Just hating.
All right, we'll take the
Haters
shots
gonna
on
hate,
Tim.
man.
Yeah.
No, obviously you're gonna pick it's gonna start, so I gotta pick it's not gonna start.
You're just trying to drink.
I hope it starts, not so I can drink, but like I'm just creating some drama. So,
Yeah, okay.
so you guys pick what you think it's gonna do and take a shot or not take a shot accordingly.
Where'd you get that
Let me double
hat?
check my bases here because I don't want to take a shot.
No, you said it's ready.
No, you've
It's
been
ready.
good.
I know it's ready.
Where'd you get that hat?
One of my buddies who's not a car guy saw it at a garage sale and bought it for me.
Oh, damn.
All right.
It's a collector's item.
You guys ready? Let's see what happens.
There's wipers.
I get to take a shot.
Ah, bitch!
It was very climactic though. Did you see that? It was
Yeah.
like
Had to build fuel pressure,
apparently.
sir.
Why is
Fired right up. First
I'm
try.
gonna go get some whiskey. I'll be right back.
Woohoo!
Not an issue.
All right, Nathan. Well, your car runs.
So come get it. That's it. We're
yeah,
done.
come on down. I'm done. No. No, there's clearly still a lot of work to be done to this car. A lot of cleaning up and a lot of suspension install and the driveline install and the shifter install and the radiator, blah, 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 blah. Okay, yeah. So anyway, now that we know it runs, what I'm going to do, well, first of all, is disconnect the battery. And then I'm going to take this back up, trim all the wires off that we don't need, and finish up this connector, and then we'll move on probably to the cooling system, the induction system, and then all the driveline stuff. So,
I'd
but
say-
first, we get to see this man take a shot.
Thanks, Mike, for the whiskey.
Oh, at least it was a hefty shot.
Yeah, it wasn't.
That was, he did not back out.
Yep.
Cheers, guys.
Well, I'm going to get to work, guys. A lot of this stuff is pretty boring, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the rest of this project in fast motion for you, and we'll cue up some funky music for you. And then once I'm all done and everything's finished, we'll go over everything and I'll show you what I did. So anyway, stay tuned. Okay, so at this point, what I'm doing is getting all of the shift linkage and everything set up. So I guess I just wanted to visualize a little bit how all this stuff goes together in case you guys are curious or in case you don't know. So we'll just visualize that real quick and I'll give you another very quick overview on what parts you need. I went ahead and put poly bushings into the carrier here. Greased up the old shift cup. So we're gonna put that in, and remember the tabs, if you can see them, these wider sections right there, those go aligned with these slots. So just push it in like that. Clicks in, nice and easy. This car already had a polyurethane bushing. I pulled this. This is where the carrier slides in at the rear. I was gonna put a polyurethane bushing in it, but it already has one. So easy peasy. That makes my job much easier, quicker.
Squeezy.
So we're just gonna go ahead and put them in. Now, what you want to do, so the way I like to do this is I leave the linkage on the transmission when I pull it, and then I just pull the bitch clip out of the front of the carrier and slide the carrier forward and pull it straight down, so you can remove this all in one go. But what we're gonna do now is the reverse. I'm gonna take the bitch clip out. And the bitch clip, for those of you who are not familiar, is this pin that holds the carrier to the transmission. So this slides through right like that, and then locks down forwards, and then it's locked to the transmission. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Slide this in, and then up and over, and right in. Ooh, that's nice and tight. All right, cool. It's gonna fit good. So yeah, and then you want to make sure when you put this bushing in, there's actually tabs on the top of the chassis that it has to go into that help stabilize it. So once you get the hole lined up,
I should probably verify on my car that I did that.
yeah,
Yeah.
those tabs at the top are actually pretty clutch for shift feel. No pun intended.
Right.
Jeez, poly bushing is.
You're on the lower hole
Yeah, I
now.
know. I'm just trying to get these freaking. There we go.
And the best bet is just to put it in whatever hole you found it in, or if you're doing the swap.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to go in the upper hole, but this one doesn't really want to go in the upper hole. So I may dick with that a little bit off camera here. But anyway, once you get that in, slide this pin in and lock it forward. You may have to pull the transmission down in order to do so. You may also have to fight with your carrier alignment front to back and up and down in order to get that pin to go through nice and easy. But once you do that, then we can hook up the shifter. As you can see, this is the E36 M3 shift linkage because we're using a ZF transmission again, but you can see that the shift cup is perfectly centered in the hole, and that the linkage, when the transmission is in neutral, aligns the shifter basically straight up and down like that. You want to make sure your shifter is centered straight up and down, your transmission is in neutral, and then you measure the distance center from this hole to center on the transmission side, and that'll give you the length that you need to make this from the center of the rod to the center of the rod, and then you can cut or lengthen or shorten as necessary. Same thing goes for the carrier here. If you're actually going to modify a carrier and not get an E36 M3 or a 325 carrier, depending on what transmission you're using, you just want this shift cup centered when the pin is in. So put the pin in, figure out how much it's offset, remove or add that amount, and then you should be good to go. The rear of it usually never needs to be modified, especially if you're using a stock bushing. They're usually pretty sloppy. So for drive shaft, for those of you who are not familiar, if you're using a ZF transmission, this is what you need. This is an E36 M3 drive shaft with a 4-bolt rear. The 6-bolt CV style rear will not work, which I believe is 95 only, but I've seen some variants on what cars have it and what don't. So bottom line is, you want the longer front section like this, and you can actually use pretty much any rear section. The front section is the most important part. Just make sure if you're swapping sections and mixing and matching that you get your drive shaft balanced, because otherwise you may have vibration. So we're going to use this, and I'm going to put a 318 IS carrier bearing on it, so that way it lines up. I'll give you a visual here as to why we need to do that.
And verify on FCP.
What's that?
Verify on FCP, because we've seen a few.
Yeah, there's definitely been some differences and some wrong parts. But so you can see that the bracketry for the E36 style does not fit. Now, if you want to be ghetto and you want to do this on a budget, I have modified these to work. You can drill new holes, you can modify the bracket. It's not going to be as strong, but you can do it if you just want to get the car going and go do burnouts and fix it later. But the way to do it is remove this separate the drive shaft and replace the center support bearing with the matching chassis. So if you've got a 318, use a 318. If you've got a 325E, use a 325E, etc. And then just real quick on the drive shaft, for the ZF transmission from the E36 M3 or 328 IS, you can use one of 3 drive shafts. You can use a 325E large Guibo drive shaft. Now they made both, so make sure that you have the larger style flex disc. Okay. You can also use the 328 IS E36 drive shaft, or you can use the E36 M3 drive shaft. And again, just make sure it's a 4-bolt rear, but any of those drive shafts should work. If you're using a Getrag transmission, you can just use a 325i E36 drive shaft. And those are plentiful. They're everywhere. They're even cheaper and easier to find than these are. So it may actually behoove you to use a Getrag transmission. They're not as strong, but if you're not boosting it, it's going to be fine.
We did get a question as well. Can we use the stock transmission on the M5X engine? And then, what do you got to do?
Okay, so that is a good question. Yes, you can use the stock transmission. I don't recommend it, but in order to make that work, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to use the G260 pilot bearing in the S52 or M52 or M50, whatever crank you're using. So use the Getrag 260, so E30 pilot bearing you're going to need to use. You can actually still use an E36 style clutch if you want. I believe the splines and diameter are the same, so you can use that, that's fine. However, the biggest deal is that those transmissions are actually clocked differently. So if you use an M5X engine with an E30 transmission, it's going to be offset 12 degrees, and additionally, you're not going to be able to get any of these lower oil pan bolts in that go through the bell housing into the oil pan. So the only bolts, you're only really going to have 4 bolts holding your transmission on, which is okay. you know, it's okay. Well, that gland nut was loose apparently. But anyway, that's fine. You can do that, and I really don't think it's gonna break, but I don't highly recommend that. You know what I mean? If that's all you've got and you're working on a budget, it'll work. You can do it. And actually, that does allow you to maintain the use of your stock drive shaft if you choose to do that. You don't have to change the drive shaft at all. So that would be another reason to do it. But the G260 does not hold up very well to high RPM bang shifting. So don't be surprised if you S52 swap with a G260 if you end up with a reverse gear sitting on the ground sometime. So that would be all I really have to say about that. Oh, additionally, I'm sorry. So it offsets your transmission 12 degrees. So in order to get this to work, funny, look what I have right here.
Let me get around.
This is exactly what you have to do. So you see here, end shot. You see how this is offset like that?
That's how you know it's 12 degrees, huh?
Yep. Well, it's also, I looked it up. But,
oh, okay.
no, so this is one that I modified with a lot of booger welding, albeit. But this linkage was on an E30 with an M20 with an E36 transmission. So same deal, just one way you'll have to clock it one way, the other way you'll have to clock it the other way, depending on which engine and which transmission you're using. But you can go backwards and forwards. But yeah, so what you need to do is cut it, offset your pins about 12 degrees, and then re-weld it. You can also just heat it up with an oxy torch and just twist it if you want to do that. But this is the way to solve that problem. Yeah, so expect to use a custom carrier. They do sell off-the-shelf parts in order to do that. I don't really know why you'd want to do it other than just balling on a budget. That would be really the only reason I'd see to do that. No matter what transmission you're using for the swap, you can use quite literally any 3 Series transmission mount. And I don't mean the cross member, I mean the rubber isolator mounts themselves. E46 M3 works, E36 works, E30 works, pretty much anything works except the style that I unfortunately happen to have, which is this goofy offset style. You can modify these to get them to work by cutting the alignment dowels off of one side. But these are pretty old and crusty, and they're available off the shelf at most auto parts stores. So I'm going to go ahead and just buy a set of probably E46 M3 transmission isolator mounts, and we'll use those. But
Yeah.
any 3 Series works.
We actually have 2 just sitting in the bolt bucket over there.
Oh, do we really?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I may have to throw Chris a couple bucks for those then.
Yeah.
Cool.
But really quick, just because it's there,
Yes.
slave cylinder.
Slave cylinder. So you want to match your slave cylinder style with your transmission. So this is an E30 G240 slave cylinder. We're going to be swapping that out for an E36 M3 slave cylinder. So I'm going to go pull the one off of the donor car, and we'll be running that. The threads are the same on all of them, so you don't have to worry about that. But the issue that you run into, and you can actually use a lot of them back and forth and, you know, mismatch them. A lot of them will work, but what you need to pay attention to is the depth from the end of this pin to the mounting point. Okay, so here, I'll measure this one. Is measure the one from your donor car and measure the one on your car, and you'll be able to tell if you'll be able to use it. So you want to go from that mounting point, right? So we'll put the 0 on the mounting point, and it looks like this is about 2.5 inches, 2 3/4 inches, something like that. And you just want to measure the amount of throw that it has. If they match, you can use them because they all have the same offset on the bolts, so it'll bolt right up. So no big deal. You can do that if you want, but I have the E36 M3 one, so there's really no reason not to use it. Yeah, and I think that just about covers all the transmission stuff. If I missed anything, please feel free to comment below, and I will hopefully see your comment and respond to it. I try to answer as many of them as I can. So I'm going to wrap up all the transmission stuff, and then we'll move on to the cooling system, the brake booster, tucking all the wiring in, and just kind of finishing touches on this. Okay, so here's what I was talking about. This is why you need to use the M3 style if you have this style right here. You can see this large protrusion. The distance between the mounting point and the overall throw of the slave cylinder is completely different by about 3 inches. So M3 slave cylinder going in. I have cleaned up the wiring a good bit. There probably is going to be a little bit more than I'm going to do, but if you guys are wondering how to make your wiring look this clean, all I did was, firstly, sorry, get right behind you here. I removed the factory E36. This is the cover for the wiring. And I also removed the bottom section that I'm trying to find to show you. But I don't know where oh, here it is. Okay. So typically on E36 wiring, you have this box that sits here and it never really works well and it just kind of floats around. There's nowhere to mount it, etc. So what I do is I cut this off, and I cut all of the rubber little pieces off that mount in here. So there's basically just rubber grommets that hold all the wiring in. So I very carefully with a razor blade remove those, remove the box, and then as you guys know, this is a 318 IS. So this car already had these covers, but these are specific to the 91 318 IS, the 91 318i, and all E30 M3s. They are still available. They are not expensive. I think it's up between like 15 and 80 bucks per piece. So for somewhere around 200 bucks, you can get all the proper coverings. And there's even one that goes right here that will cover all of this stuff up that we don't have, and I'm not going to be able to get in time, but you can make your wiring look really clean. Additionally, it mounts all the relays, so right under this panel, I apologize for zip tying this up before I could show you guys, but right under this panel, all of the relays for this swap are in there as well. So it's really nice. It tucks everything up and really cleans it up nicely. Now on to the cooling system. The cooling system at this point is fairly sorted. I'll show you what I did. Now, again, if you guys are watching this, you're probably doing a swap, and it's probably not going to be this exact car and engine combo. So I'm going to try to cover a few different options for you here. I elected to use the stock 318i radiator. This car is going to be up in Seattle. It's not going to be seeing a whole lot of hard track driving or hot weather driving, so the 318IS radiator is going to be completely fine. I have used this radiator for the swap before, and as long as you're not tracking the crap out of it, and as long as you have a working fan, it keeps the car completely cool. No big deal. However, if you are in a more spicy climate, you may want to use the M3 radiator. If you would like to do that, you can. However, the fan does not fit on the front, nor do electric fans. You might be able to get two very small, like transmission cooler size electric fans to work. I've done it once in the past, but it is an absolute pain in the ass to do. You have to put the radiator in first, and then you have to mount and wire each fan individually after the radiator is already mounted and supported and everything, just because of how tight the fitment is. I mean, it is tight, 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 and you have to offset them in the perfect places so that the pulleys don't hit them. So if you don't want to do that, probably the move is to put a nice gigantic pusher fan between the condensers. So if you look here, if you fit a slim fan, you can actually get a slim fan between here. And this radiator, you can actually push it further forward, but because the hoses are on, there's not a whole lot of room. But you can fit a slim, like a Spall style fan between there. You can also try to use the factory AC fan, which if you jump these terminals over here, where is it? Okay, so right here, if you jump between, I believe it's this one and this one, or this one and this one, you can get a high or a low going on your stock AC condenser fan. That's not really the greatest thing, but again, if you're just kind of trying to get your car on the road to test drive it, it'll work. I don't recommend it. Definitely switch to a bigger fan. As far as hoses are concerned, guys, there's not really like a magic solution for every radiator. Obviously, you're going to have to just play with hoses. What I did on this one was I actually used both of the stock E36 M3 radiator hoses. The bottom one is unmodified. The top one, I had to cut about 6 inches off of the engine side. So you can see I don't have it mounted on yet. But all I did was trim this side of it right here, and it fits right up. Well, once it's mounted, it does, you can see. But I'm not connecting it yet because I want to get the fan on and wired and verified to be working before I fill this cooling system and start bleeding it and make sure that the heater works and all of that stuff. But we're getting very, very close. We've got the drive shaft all hooked up. Oh, we didn't show them that either, did we?
Not all hooked up, no.
Okay, we'll show you that. So, as you can see, the drive line's bolted in, all the linkage is connected. So this transmission is fully functional at this point. I do still need to put the two top nuts on the transmission mounts, but we also have the clutch hooked up. So I swapped over the M3 slave cylinder. So bleeding that, put that mount on, we're good to go. This is the E30 center support bearing. So I put that on the E36 drive shaft. Luckily, my buddy Matt, who I got the car from, had recently swapped it, so it was pretty easy to get off. That was nice. And then you can see that, you know, the M3 drive shaft, it's pretty crazy. It bolts right up. I mean, this car dimensionally is almost identical, you know, lengthwise and mounting point wise to the E36 M3, which is cool. It makes the swap a lot easier. So no big deal. Transmission side sorted. I just got to get the suspension back together, get the cooling system functional, and we're gonna be taking this sucker for a rip. Okay, so I have the cooling system sorted at this point, and I just almost finished up the fan wiring, but I wanted to show you guys how to do this. It's very easy. Okay, so you've got your 2 wires coming off your fan, right? You want to ground one of them, or you can ground one of them, okay? So, and then your other one is going to be fed by the main hot wire coming out of your relay, okay? You're also going to power your relay right here. So I'm running a dedicated hot directly off the junction block here. And then you're going to ground the other side of that. So these 2 polarity don't matter, these 2 polarity doesn't matter, but just know that your small wires on your relay are going to be your signal wires. Your large ones are going to be your power wires that send power to where you want it to go. So when I give this signal, oh, you can hear the fan turn on, hopefully.
Science.
So all you need to do now is find a key on 12-volt power supply under the dash and run it to a switch. So one side of the switch is going to run to the 12-volt power supply, and then the other side of the switch is going to run to this relay, so that when I flip the switch, it sends 12 volts here, which in turn completes the circuit through the ground on this side, which makes the relay turn on. And when the relay turns on, that's basically the equivalent of closing a circuit. So it then sends 12 volts to the fan, through the fan, and then grounds it to the ground right here. So very straightforward. I know it seems complicated if you guys are intimidated by wiring, but it's very, very simple. Just think of it like flowing water on 2 different sides of a dam or something like that. I don't know. Also, just want to say, fuck thieves. If anybody knows anybody who just magically came across an M3 exhaust or a 325i exhaust, let me know, because somebody's been stealing stuff from us. Oh, also, if you know anybody that came across a ton of turbos and tuning equipment, let us know also. We've been robbed twice in the last month. So anyway, yeah, I'm going to have to fabricate an exhaust for this car now, but that's neither here nor there. So let me know if you know who took it. Reward. So there is something that I forgot to mention on the earlier videos, or on the earlier video rather, that I just rectified. So this right here is the throttle body preheater nipple that comes out of the head. There's a hose that attaches to this that runs to the throttle body on the OBD2 cars. It's also on the OBD1 cars, but we're only talking about OBD2 right now because OBD1 has the correct thread pattern, and you'll know what I'm talking about here in a second. So this is an E30 brown top coolant temperature sensor. So what I did, because these originally come in M14 by 1.5 thread, which is obviously too big to fit in the OBD2 head. So what I did was I took, and they sell a part to as a direct swap online if you guys want to do that. There's a bunch of different companies that do it, but I don't have time to wait, so I did it my way. So what I did is I put my temperature sensor in my drill. Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2 is I took my calipers here and I got them to the exact same size as the nipple here, the threads, and then locked it in with this right here. So turned the bench grinder on, and I used the fine side. This is my rough side, this is my fine side. So, and then I turned it down like that. So as this is turning, I'm spinning it, so it basically keeps it perfectly straight, or at least as straight as you can be, while turning it down. And then as I was going, I checked until this had just a nice tight, I mean, you can, that's actually damn good. It's like perfect. So once I had that the correct diameter, then I took my happy ass down to the hardware store and I bought this little fella, a die in the flavor of M12 by 1.5. So this is the thread you need. I think this die was like 16 bucks. But anyway, you want it to look like this, and then it screws right in.
Yeah, that came out really nice.
Yep. No big deal. You can't even tell.
Looks stock.
Yep. So this will thread right into the head, and then what we're going to do is I'm going to send one wire from this to the C101 on the coolant temperature pin. And here, let me find out what pin that is so I know what to tell you guys. Okay, you're going to run it to pin 4. Pin 4 is what you want this to go to. So one wire, just run it out to pin 4 on the C101 on the chassis side. I guess you can also wire it into the backside of your X20 if you want. Doesn't matter because we wired this when we made the adapter. So if you put it into the backside of the X20 on your E36 harness, it'll work. And you want to make sure that it's going to pin 4, okay? So whatever pin 4 on the C101 goes to on the X20 side, just make sure that your signal is making it to pin 4 on the chassis side of the E30 C101, okay? Cool. So that's sorted. So now we have a working temp gauge. Okay, well, this is 99% of the information that you will ever need to know to do a 24 valve swap into an E30. I feel like I covered our bases pretty well here. There's still a few little things that I need to finish up here, but this video is very long. If you're seeing this, props for sticking it to the end, because this is a long one. This is the longest we've done, in fact. However, there's still going to be a third video with me doing some final touches here, just little things like air filter and final fan wiring and driving around. Actually, most of it's going to be driving and doing burnouts and with Brock, so stay tuned for that. It's going to be a fun one. But as always, I hope you guys got some useful information out of these videos. That's why I do them, because you guys want to see them. So thank you so much for watching. Please spread the word about us, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So yeah, have a great day, and swap your cars, boys and ladies and non-gender people. Later.